My father said I was humiliating the Whitmore name. My mother said family supported family. My younger brother, Miles, asked how I could destroy his anniversary celebration over a little money. That little money was $20,000. It belonged to me. I had never offered it, promised it, or signed anything agreeing to pay it. In fact, I had sent my family a written message explicitly telling them not to make commitments in my name. They did it anyway. That Sunday evening, I sat at the long mahogany table in my parents' mansion while my father lectured me about loyalty. My mother wore pearls and a wounded expression. Miles held a glass of scotch as though this were an ordinary family disagreement that could be solved once I stopped being difficult. Beside my plate were 3 photograph albums, the hotel contract, and a spreadsheet measuring what my family had spent nearly 3 decades pretending did not exist. My father glanced at the stack and laughed. "More theatrics, Clara?" "No," I said. "An accounting." The word silenced the room. They thought the argument was about a party. It was not. It was about 28 years of forgotten birthdays, empty chairs, stolen celebrations, unpaid favors, and money that seemed to become family property the moment I earned it. My father had used my name to promise money I had never agreed to give. What I did not know yet was that this was not the first time my family had rewritten the purpose of my money. That night, I walked into their house, hoping to end one lie. Before the year was over, I would discover another one so carefully buried that even the person who benefited from it had never known the truth. The lobby of my apartment building smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paint, the carefully manufactured scent of luxury designed to make tenants feel better about paying too much rent. My heels struck the marble floor in a slow, hollow rhythm as I crossed toward the elevators. It was nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in early September. I had spent 14 hours at Horizon Public Relations, first finalizing a major campaign agreement with Westfield Apparel, and then attending a celebratory dinner with executives who had thanked me more sincerely in one evening than my family had in years. The elevator doors opened. Polished chrome reflected a woman who should have looked happier. Clara Jane Whitmore, 28 years old that day. My dark hair was still pinned neatly at the back of my head. My cream blazer remained mostly unwrinkled. My makeup had faded around my eyes. But from a distance I looked composed, accomplished, and entirely in control. That was the version of me the world usually saw. The elevator began to rise. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. Not even a hurried birthday greeting from my parents or Miles. I told myself I had expected it. That should have softened the disappointment. It did not. My apartment greeted me with warm cream walls, bookshelves I had assembled myself, and framed prints I had saved months to buy. The place was elegant without being extravagant, every object chosen carefully because I had spent most of my childhood living in rooms where nothing reflected me. On the coffee table sat a single carrot cupcake with cream cheese frosting. I had bought it that morning, from the bakery across from Horizon. Carrot cake had been my favorite since childhood. My grandmother had always remembered. Every year I spent with her, she grated the carrots by hand and let me steal frosting from the bowl. My mother preferred chocolate. Miles liked vanilla with raspberry filling. Somehow, every family birthday cake had been one of those 2 flavors. I set down my briefcase, removed my shoes, and sat on the sofa. The cupcake looked painfully small in the quiet room. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered. The words disappeared without an echo. I reached for my phone, telling myself I only wanted to check the time. Instead, my thumb opened social media. The first photograph stopped me. Miles stood beneath a banner reading, "Congratulations on your promotion." His suit was perfectly tailored, his champagne glass raised. My father had one arm around his shoulders. My mother stood on his other side, smiling beneath the chandelier light. Behind them were cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, and Reverend Wallace from my parents' church. Everyone who had been too busy for my last birthday had somehow found time for Miles. The caption read, "The Whitmores celebrating another milestone for our star." I stared until the faces blurred. The photographs had been uploaded 4 hours earlier. The party had begun while I was still presenting the final Westfield strategy to the board. More pictures followed. Miles cutting a 3-tier cake, Jessica kissing his cheek, my father presenting him with an engraved watch, cousin Elaine holding a sign that said, "The Whitmore legacy continues." My parents had not simply forgotten my birthday. They had chosen something else over it. Again, pain has a strange appetite. Sometimes it makes you seek out the very thing that is hurting you. I kept scrolling. A memory rose before I could stop it. I was 11 years old, wearing a yellow sweater Grandma had knitted for me, sitting in the corner booth of Angelo's Pizza. My legs did not reach the floor. A cupcake sat in front of me, its candle bending as hot wax pooled into the frosting. My parents had promised they would return from Miles's debate competition before dinner. The waitress kept asking whether she should bring the rest of the food. I kept saying, "They will be here soon." They arrived almost 2 hours late. Miles entered, carrying a trophy taller than my torso. My father was laughing. My mother was crying with pride. No one noticed that the candle had burned itself out. I blew on the smoke anyway. Back in my apartment, I looked at the carrot cupcake and wondered how many versions of me had spent birthdays waiting. At 11, I waited in a restaurant. At 28, I waited in an apartment I had paid for myself. The clock moved toward midnight. I considered lighting the candle, but celebration felt too much like pretending. Then my phone rang. Mom. My heart reacted before my mind could stop it. For one humiliating second, hope rushed through me. Maybe she had remembered. Maybe the promotion party had been scheduled before she noticed the date. Maybe she was calling to apologize. I answered. "Hello? Clara, darling." My mother sounded bright and breathless. Music played faintly behind her. "I'm so glad you're still awake." I waited. "I wanted to speak with you about Miles and Jessica's anniversary in January," she continued. "We're planning something special. Nothing excessive, of course, but they deserve a proper celebration." January was 4 months away. She began describing a ballroom, white roses, a string quartet, and a guest list that had somehow expanded to nearly 200 people. Then she said, "We thought you could handle the catering and perhaps the venue deposit. You are so good with events." "I work in public relations, Mom." "Exactly. You understand presentation." The clock changed. Midnight. My birthday was over. "Mom," I said. She continued talking about floral installations. "Mom, what is it? Yesterday was my birthday." Silence. "Oh." Another pause. "Oh, honey. With Miles's promotion and all this planning, it simply slipped my mind." Slipped. Like an appointment. Like a grocery item. Like something too unimportant to survive a busy week. "I see," I said. "Do not be dramatic, Clara. We will take you to lunch soon." She immediately returned to the anniversary. "The hotel requires $20,000 to secure the primary ballroom and catering package. Your father thinks it makes sense for you to cover that portion." I almost laughed. Why would I do that? Because family supports family. The sentence had followed me all my life. Family supports family when Miles needs an internship contact. Family supports family when Dad's property development experiences temporary difficulties. Family supports family when my mother needs a charity gala organized with 3 days' notice. But when I need someone at my birthday dinner, family is busy. "I am not agreeing to anything," I said. Her tone cooled. "You do not have to decide tonight. We can discuss it tomorrow when you are less emotional." "I am not emotional. I am saying no." "Clara?" "No." For once, the word did not come with an apology. She ended the call. I sat in silence. Across the room, above my desk, hung photographs I had chosen myself. College friends, co-workers, and one picture of Grandma standing in her garden. There had once been another photograph. I was 7 years old, sitting on the tire swing behind Grandma's house, my hair flying as I laughed. It was the only childhood picture I remembered loving, because I looked completely unguarded. After Grandma died, the photograph disappeared into one of my father's storage boxes. Whenever I asked about it, my mother said she did not know what I meant. I looked back at the unlit candle. My mother had forgotten my birthday. But before she hung up, she had mentioned a number that made me realize forgetting me was only the beginning. The following morning, I arrived at Horizon before 8. Work was the one place where I understood the rules. Effort produced results. Results earned recognition. People could be demanding, political, or difficult, but no one pretended my contribution did not exist while simultaneously asking me to finance theirs. I had barely opened my laptop when an email from accounting appeared. Performance bonus approved. The figure beneath it was $75,000 before tax. I read the number twice. The Westfield campaign had increased quarterly revenue by more than 40%. I had rebuilt the strategy after another agency nearly destroyed the account, led a team through weeks of crisis calls, and persuaded a skeptical board to approve a national relaunch. I had earned the bonus. For several seconds, pride filled me without complication. Then my office door opened. Jasmine Bell leaned against the frame, balancing 2 coffees. "You look like you either won the lottery or discovered a body." "Bonus," I said. She handed me a cup. "How much?" I turned the screen toward her. Her eyes widened. "Clara, I know. You are buying champagne. After payroll clears, the bonus would arrive with Friday's salary. After taxes, the amount would be much lower, but combined with the savings I had built over 6 years, it represented security. A future. Something that belonged to me." Jasmine studied my face. "Why do you look as though someone died?" I told her about the birthday, the promotion party, my mother's call, the $20,000 demand. Jasmine's expression hardened. "They forgot your birthday and then invoiced you?" "They did not technically invoice me. Give them time." My phone vibrated. A notification appeared from an old WhatsApp group called Whitmore Family. I had muted it years earlier after realizing every conversation centered on Miles, my parents' social obligations, or requests disguised as updates. I rarely opened it and assumed the family had forgotten I was still included. Apparently, they had. My father's message sat near the top. "Clara should contribute significantly. At least 20,000. She has no children and few responsibilities." My mother responded. "Exactly. She just received a major bonus. It is time she supported the family for once." For once? I scrolled. Cousin Elaine offered to cover the floral centerpieces. An aunt volunteered wine. Someone suggested I could use my professional contacts to arrange publicity photographs. Then my mother wrote, "Quinn can manage the rest. She owes the family 1N." She had misspelled my name while assigning away my money. Jasmine read over my shoulder. "That is extortion with floral arrangements." A bitter laugh escaped me. Another message appeared. "Miles deserves this. He carries the Whitmore name with pride." I thought about everything they had erased with the phrase, "for once." The rent payment I covered during one of Dad's property disputes. The unpaid days I spent organizing my mother's charity gala. The introductions I made for Miles. The $32,000 I wired to my father almost 3 years earlier after he called late one night and said the family might lose everything. He claimed a development called Hawthorne Heights had collapsed. He said temporary liquidity could save the project and protect the house. I transferred nearly all my savings the following morning. He never repaid me. Whenever I asked, he said the money had disappeared into legal costs and that I should be proud I had helped the family survive. Now they spoke as though I had never contributed anything. My shame began turning into something colder. I typed a response. "I will not be contributing to the anniversary party. Do not make commitments, contact vendors, or use my name in connection with any payment or sponsorship." I read it twice before pressing send. The group became silent. For nearly a minute, no one replied. Then my father wrote, "Do not embarrass yourself." My mother followed. "You are tired and upset. We will discuss this privately." I answered, "There is nothing to discuss. My answer is, no." The phone began ringing immediately. First Mom, then Dad, then Miles. I declined every call. Jasmine placed both hands on my desk. "How do you feel?" "Terrified." "Good." I stared at her. "Not because you should be afraid," she clarified. "Because fear means you did something unfamiliar. You set a boundary. My office phone rang. The display showed Lawrence Grant, Horizon's executive director. I answered. Come to the boardroom, he said. Westfield wants to expand the campaign. The next 2 hours belonged to the life I had built. I presented revised projections, negotiated staffing requirements, and answered questions without hesitation. No one interrupted me. No one asked whether Miles had achieved something more impressive. Afterward, Lawrence stopped beside me. You did exceptional work, he said. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. The words struck harder than he intended. Thank you. When I returned to my office, a new email waited in my personal inbox. The sender was the Langford Grand Hotel. The subject line read, Whitmore Anniversary Account Confirmation. I opened it. Dear Miss Whitmore, we are pleased to be assisting with the upcoming anniversary celebration for Miles and Jessica Whitmore. Before finalizing the event account, we need to verify your role and confirm the contact information attached. My stomach tightened. The attachment listed the January event date, the estimated guest count, and a payment schedule. My full name appeared under Family Contact. My job title appeared beneath it. Clara Whitmore, Senior Strategist. Horizon Public Relations. I had never spoken to the hotel. I had never provided my title. I had never agreed to participate. I forwarded the message to my private account and saved screenshots of the family chat. Then I replied to the hotel. Please send me copies of all documents and correspondence identifying my role in this event. A few minutes later, my mother sent a private message. Please respond to the Langford today. We told them you were helping with the arrangements. I typed back. I already said no. Her answer came immediately. This is not the time to be difficult. Your father has already handled the important details. I looked at the attachment again. The hotel did not yet say what my supposed role was. But someone had given them my full name, my employer, and my professional title. Someone had expected me to confirm something I had never agreed to do. The hotel promised to send the complete file by the end of the following week. While I waited, my family changed tactics. My mother sent photographs of ballroom arrangements. My father left a voicemail saying my refusal was a temporary emotional reaction. Miles sent a text. Can we talk like adults? I stared at it before answering. About what? He called immediately. Clara, what is happening with you? What do you mean? This party. Mom says you are refusing to help because you are upset about my promotion. That is not why. Then why make this into a crisis? You are asking me to spend $20,000 on your anniversary. I did not choose that number. But you are willing to accept it. He sighed. It is not as though you cannot afford it. You just received a huge bonus. The fact that he knew confirmed my mother had already told him. My income is not family property. No one said it was. The group chat did. Silence. You saw that? I am still in the group, Miles. Another pause. They were speaking emotionally. You know how Dad gets. I also know you called last month asking me to arrange a meeting with Regent Tech's marketing director. That was business. It was a favor. You know him. I met him once at a conference. One introduction could help me close an enormous account. And if I say no? His answer came too slowly. I would wonder why my sister did not want to help me. There it was. He did not sound cruel. That almost made it worse. Miles had spent his entire life inside a system designed around his needs. He did not think of himself as entitled because no one had ever required him to examine what he received. I am not making the introduction, I said. His voice changed. You are punishing me for Mom and Dad. No, I am allowing you to handle your own career. Family helps family. I closed my eyes. So everyone keeps telling me. I ended the call. That afternoon, Jasmine entered my office, carrying a legal pad. Write down what you want, she said. I want them to stop. That is what you want from them. What do you want for yourself? I almost said peace, but the word felt too abstract. I wanted a place where my mother's voice did not live in the walls. A place my father could not enter simply by raising his voice. A place where every object existed because I had chosen it. I want something that is mine, I said. That evening, I reviewed my finances. I had slightly more than $60,000 in savings. My bonus, after taxes, would add roughly $47,000. I had no significant debt beyond a modest car payment. My salary was stable, and my credit was strong. On impulse, I opened a property website. Lakefront homes in Michigan appeared across the screen. Some were far beyond my reach. Others were small cabins requiring more repair than I could manage. I saved 6 listings. The following day, I contacted a mortgage advisor. By the end of the week, I had preliminary approval for a loan large enough to purchase a modest lake property while retaining money for closing costs and essential repairs. I did not tell my family. Over the next 2 weekends, I toured homes. The first had beautiful windows but severe foundation damage. The second stood too close to a busy road. The third looked perfect online but smelled of mold. The fourth was a weathered 2-story house with sage siding, scuffed wooden floors, an aging roof, and a deck facing Lake Michigan. It was not perfect. The kitchen needed updating. Several windows had to be replaced. The electrical panel was old. The upstairs bathroom looked as though it had not changed in 30 years. But sunlight filled the living room. Pine trees framed the property. From the upstairs balcony, the lake stretched beyond the horizon. The real estate agent, Margaret Hale, listed every defect with refreshing honesty. "The seller is motivated," she said, "but do not skip the inspection." I will not. I walked through the house again. In one corner of the living room was an empty space large enough for a reading chair. Above the fireplace, I imagined hanging my Excellence in Strategy award, the one my father had once called cute. I did not feel impulsive certainty. I felt something better. Possibility. That evening, I ran the numbers twice. The asking price was $365,000. With negotiation, my savings and bonus could cover a substantial down payment, closing costs, and a repair reserve. I submitted an offer contingent on financing, appraisal, and inspection. The following morning, my mother texted, "How would you like your name printed on the event materials? Clara J. Whitmore or Clara Whitmore?" I replied, "Neither. I am not participating in the event account." She answered, "Do not worry. We have already handled the difficult part." Before I could ask what she meant, Margaret called, "The seller accepted your offer." For the first time in days, I smiled. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The mortgage advisor sent a list of documents. The closing process was expected to take approximately 6 weeks. Nothing was final yet. Still, I allowed myself to imagine morning coffee on the deck and quiet evenings beside the lake. Then another message arrived from the Langford. "Miss Whitmore, we need to verify your role before preparing the final event materials. Your parents have requested that your professional details be included." The seller had accepted my offer, but my mother's message made it clear that my family had accepted something in my name too. The house inspection took place on Tuesday morning. Margaret walked beside me while the inspector tested outlets, climbed into the attic, examined the roof, and opened every cabinet. The house needed work, but nothing made it unsafe or impossible. The roof required partial replacement. The electrical panel needed modernization. 2 upstairs windows had moisture damage. The furnace was old but functional. I negotiated a reduction in price and a seller credit toward closing expenses. The process felt almost shockingly adult. There were forms, disclosures, deadlines, appraisals, bank statements, and long conversations about monthly payments. No one could make a decision for me. No one could sign my name. Every commitment required my explicit agreement. That contrast made the hotel documents feel even more violating. At the end of the week, the Langford sent the complete event file. I opened it in my office, after most of the staff had gone home. The first page listed my parents as event hosts. The second identified Miles and Jessica as the guests of honor. The third page stopped me. Committed family sponsor, Clara Whitmore. Senior strategist, Horizon Public Relations. The projected amount beside my name was not merely $20,000. The payment schedule made me responsible, according to the information my parents had provided, for the primary venue and catering balance. My father had signed the contract. He had not forged my signature. Instead, he had signed as the organizer and represented that I had committed to providing sponsorship funds. Legally, the difference mattered. Emotionally, it did not. The file included emails from my mother. Clara has confirmed that she will handle the principal costs. Please include her professional title. Her company may appreciate the visibility. She is extremely successful and eager to support her brother. I read that final sentence 3 times. Eager. A draft of the printed program was attached. Miles and Jessica Whitmore. A celebration of marriage, family, and legacy. Near the bottom, in elegant gold lettering, were the words, "Generously sponsored by Clara Whitmore, Senior Strategist at Horizon Public Relations." My family had not simply expected me to pay. They had transformed that expectation into a public fact. If I refused now, they could tell nearly 200 guests that I had withdrawn a promise. They could say the smaller party was my fault. They could accuse me of humiliating the family after volunteering my name. It was not a legal trap. It was a social one. And my parents had spent my entire life teaching me to fear disappointing people. I forwarded the file to Horizon's General Counsel, Emily Foster, and requested a confidential conversation. She called me within an hour. "Did you authorize any of this?" "No." "Did you sign an agreement?" "No." "Did you tell the hotel you would pay?" "I told my family in writing that I would not." "Save those messages." Emily explained that because I had not entered the contract, I was not personally obligated to pay. My father had signed the agreement, and the hotel had relied on his representations. However, the use of Horizon's name and my professional title created a separate issue. "We need to prevent any suggestion that the company is affiliated with the event," she said. "You should send formal notice immediately. I will help you phrase it." Together, we drafted a message to the hotel, catering company, and my parents. "I have not agreed to sponsor, fund, or participate financially in this event. I do not authorize the use of my name, professional title, or employer in any promotional material. Any representation to the contrary was made without my knowledge or consent." The hotel responded within 20 minutes. They apologized, removed my information from the program, and confirmed that contractual responsibility remained with the individuals who had signed the agreement. My parents. The initial deposit was non-refundable. My mother called before the hour ended. "What have you done?" I corrected false information. "You humiliated us. You used my name without permission. We were trying to honor your success. By promising my money? You were always going to help. I told you no. You were upset." I was clear. My father took the phone. "Clara, call the hotel and reverse this." "No. You do not understand the damage you are causing. The contract is yours. The deposit is non-refundable. You signed it. For this family. For Miles." His silence confirmed it. Then his voice dropped. "You are behaving like a spoiled child." I almost admired the absurdity. "I paid for graduate school with scholarships and loans. I built my career without your help. I gave you $32,000 when you said the family was in danger. Explain which part of that is spoiled. That money protected your future too. Then show me where it went." He hung up. Over the next 5 weeks, the appraisal was completed, the lender approved the final documents, and the title company cleared the property for closing. My bonus arrived after tax. I transferred the down payment funds into the required account. I scheduled the electrical work and roof repairs to begin shortly after closing. 3 days before I was supposed to receive the keys, my father appeared at Horizon. The receptionist called my office. "Clara, there is a Richard Whitmore here. He says he is your father." Through the glass wall, I saw him standing in the reception area, wearing a dark tailored suit. His silver hair was perfectly arranged, and anger sharpened every line of his face. I went to meet him. "You cannot come here without warning. I would not have to if you answered your phone. This is my workplace. Then act professionally." Several employees looked up. I gestured toward a private conference room. He refused to move. "You have forced us to reduce the anniversary celebration," he announced loudly. "Your mother is devastated. People are asking why the sponsor withdrew." "I was never the sponsor. You have the means. That does not make the money yours." You bought some ridiculous house instead. The family rumor network had worked quickly. It is not ridiculous. You are spending family resources on a selfish fantasy. Something inside me became very still. My salary is not a family resource. My bonus is not a family resource. My savings are not a family resource. His face reddened. Everything you have began with this family. No. Everything I have began when I realized I would have to build it without you. The reception area went silent. My father stared at me, as though I had struck him. I kept my voice level. You will not use my name. You will not contact my employer. You will not make financial commitments for me. And you will not come into my workplace to punish me for saying no. Your mother was right. You have become unstable. Behind me, Lawrence Grant stepped out of the boardroom. He did not interrupt. He simply stood where my father could see him. For once, Dad realized he was not the most powerful person in the room. He lowered his voice. Come to dinner Sunday. Bring the hotel documents. We will settle this. There is nothing to settle. You owe us an explanation. No, but I will come. He looked triumphant, mistaking my decision for surrender. He had no idea what I intended to bring. 3 days later, exactly 6 weeks after the seller accepted my offer, I sat in a title company office while the closing agent guided me through the final documents. The mortgage was mine. The deed was mine. The down payment came from my savings and bonus. No family money. No co-signer. No hidden ownership interest. When the closing agent placed the keys in my hand, the metal felt cool and unexpectedly heavy. A life could begin with something that small. That evening, an envelope from my father arrived by courier. Inside was another copy of the event agreement. A note had been written across the top. You created this problem. Sunday, you will fix it. I turned to the signature page. The signature at the bottom belonged to my father, but the sponsor named on every page was me. The Whitmore mansion stood behind stone pillars and black iron gates on Lakeshore Drive. As a child, I had believed the size of the house meant we were fortunate. It took me years to understand that a beautiful house could still teach a child she did not belong. I arrived Sunday carrying 3 photograph albums, the hotel contract, and a spreadsheet I had spent most of the previous night assembling. My mother opened the door. Her eyes moved immediately to the albums. What is all that? Context. The dining room had been arranged with the good china. Candles burned in silver holders. Beef Wellington sat at the center of the table because it was Miles's favorite. No one had asked what I liked. We ate through a strained first course, while my father discussed business, and my mother praised Miles's promotion. Miles looked uncomfortable. Perhaps he understood the cruelty of repeating the celebration after the birthday they had forgotten. Perhaps he was only worried about January. Jessica was not present. Miles said she had stayed home after making it clear she did not want to be involved in another confrontation over a party she had never planned herself. When dessert arrived, Dad placed both hands on the table. Now we will address your behavior. My behavior? You withdrew support after commitments had been made. I never offered support. You knew your mother was planning the celebration. I also told her no. Mother dabbed her lips with a napkin. You knew we would never have selected the Langford if we believed you intended to abandon us. You selected it after I refused. We assumed you would come to your senses. I placed the contract on the table. You used my name, job title, and employer without permission. We were proud of you, she said. No, you were leveraging me. Miles shifted in his chair. Can we lower the temperature? I looked at him. You accepted a celebration someone else was expected to finance. I did not know they listed you publicly. But you knew they wanted my money. He looked down. My father struck the table with his palm. This is exactly the melodrama I expected. I reached for the first album. No, I said. This is the part you keep leaving out. I slid it toward Miles. The cover was dark blue, embossed with his name. Inside were photographs from nearly every year of his life. Miles at 6 beneath balloons. Miles at 10 holding a new bicycle. Miles at 16 beside a mountain of presents. Miles at 18 receiving a car with a silver bow across the hood. There were school awards, football banquets, debate trophies, graduation dinners, family vacations, and professionally photographed birthdays. Every page said the same thing. You were here. You mattered. You made this? Miles asked Mother. Of course, she said. Parents preserve memories. I placed the second album on the table. Its cover was pale green, and my name appeared in faded gold. Mother opened it. The first page held a photograph of Grandma standing beside me when I was 7. The next page showed me alone at a restaurant table beside a melted cupcake. Several pages were blank. Then came a graduation photograph taken by a friend. Another blank section. A picture of Jasmine and me at a work event. More empty pages. My mother turned them faster. There must be another album. There is not. That cannot be right. Grandma started mine, I said. After she died, no one added another page. Mother's hands became still. I pointed to the restaurant photograph. I was 11. You promised to return from Miles's debate tournament before dinner. You arrived after the candle burned out. My father leaned back. That was an important competition. It was also my birthday. We could not control the schedule. You could control whether one of you stayed. No one answered. I turned another page. This was college graduation. I finished summa cum laude. Miles stared at the photograph. I remember. Do you remember the dinner? His face changed. He did. You announced your engagement before the appetizers arrived, I continued. By dessert, no one had mentioned my degree again. I did not mean to take over your dinner. You brought a ring and stood up to make a speech. He looked away. I placed the third album between us. Vacations. Disney World. The Grand Canyon. London. Paris. A ski trip in Colorado. My parents and Miles smiled from every photograph. I was absent. Mother closed the album. You preferred staying with your grandmother. I was a child. You told me there was not enough money for everyone. That was not every trip. No. Sometimes you said I had school obligations. Sometimes you said Miles needed special attention. There was always a reason. My father's expression hardened. You were independent. I learned independence because depending on you hurt. I opened the spreadsheet. It was not a perfect accounting of my childhood. No document could measure affection. But money left traces. Miles's private school tuition. His university housing. His first car. His graduate degree. The gift toward his condominium. Trips, celebrations, and professional opportunities. Beside those figures were the amounts spent on me. My public school expenses. A portion of university tuition after scholarships. A used car I repaid within 2 years. The difference was enormous. Miles stared at the columns. Where did you get this? Old tax files Dad once asked me to organize, statements Grandma kept, and information all of you shared freely whenever you wanted me to admire what Miles received. My mother began to cry. We loved you. Perhaps you believed you did. We did our best. No. Grandma did her best. Jasmine does her best. People who have known me for 5 years have done more to celebrate me than my parents did in 28. My father pushed back his chair. You have always twisted everything. I brought photographs. You were difficult. I was quiet. You were resentful. I was invisible. You did not need what Miles needed. The sentence hung between us. I leaned forward. Why? Because he had expectations on him. And I did not? He carries this family forward. My mother whispered his name in warning. But anger had already made Dad honest. Miles represents the Whitmore legacy. You built your own life and spent years acting as though that made you superior. I built my life because you invested in his. You were easier, he shouted. You were easier to leave with your grandmother, easier to send away, easier to ignore because you always survived. Silence fell. Even my father seemed startled by the words. Mother's tears stopped looking rehearsed. Miles set down his glass. I felt something inside me break, but not in the way it had on my birthday. This break was clean, a chain giving way. You are right, I said. I survived. I pulled a worn journal page from the folder. The handwriting belonged to a 9-year-old version of me. Maybe next year they will remember without Grandma calling them. My mother covered her mouth. I did not know. You never asked. I returned the page to the folder. I am not here for an apology. I am here because you keep claiming I owe this family. I placed the final page of the spreadsheet on the table. It listed what I had contributed as an adult. Rent during one of Dad's property disputes. My mother's charity events. Business travel I covered for Miles. And the $32,000 transfer. Almost 3 years ago, Dad called and said the family could lose this house. I gave him nearly everything I had saved. My father's eyes narrowed. That was a family matter. You said it was needed to rescue the Hawthorne development. It was. Miles leaned closer to the spreadsheet. His gaze stopped on the transfer date. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Why does that date feel familiar?" My father stood. "This conversation is finished." Miles did not look away from the paper. "Which account did the money enter? That is none of your concern. It involved family money." I said enough. The room shifted. For the first time, the golden sun was asking a question my father did not want to answer. I gathered my folder. The albums remained on the table. My mother stood. "Clara, do not leave like this." "I am not leaving like this." I looked around the room. "I am leaving differently." My father's face twisted. "If you walk out now, you prove everything we said about you. I no longer care what story you tell." I walked toward the foyer. Behind me, Miles called my name. I kept moving. My hand had reached the front door when I heard his footsteps. "Clara." I turned. He was holding the spreadsheet. His finger rested beside the transfer date. His voice had lost every trace of confidence. "Where exactly did Dad tell you that money went?" The night after the dinner, I slept in the lake house for the first time. There was no bed frame yet, only a mattress on the upstairs floor. The curtains had not arrived, and moonlight spilled through the windows. The house creaked in the wind. Somewhere below, the old refrigerator hummed unevenly. I should have felt frightened or lonely. Instead, I felt free. My father's words repeated in my mind. Easier to ignore. For years, I had treated survival as proof that the neglect had not damaged me. That night, I understood survival was not the same as being unharmed. The following Monday, I searched for therapists. By Thursday, I sat across from Dr. Rebecca Levine, a woman with calm eyes and an office filled with plants. "Why are you here?" she asked. I had planned a careful answer. Instead, I said, "Because my family forgot my birthday and tried to spend my money." She waited. The rest came out in pieces. The restaurant, the vacations, the graduation dinner, the hotel contract, my father's confession. When I finished, Dr. Levine said, "You have spent a long time confusing usefulness with love." The sentence hurt because it was true. Whenever my family needed something, I became visible. A contact, a planner, a payment, a solution. When I needed something, I became demanding. "What happens if I stop being useful?" I asked. "You find out who is willing to know you." The lake house became the place where I practiced. I hired licensed contractors for the roof and electrical work. I learned enough to understand the repairs, but I did not turn the project into another test of whether I could survive alone. Jasmine helped me paint the main living room sage green. Devin from the analytics team installed shelving and taught me how to use a drill. Mrs. Bennett, my elderly neighbor from Chicago, arrived one Saturday carrying a handmade quilt in blue and green. "Every house needs something created with love," she said. Lawrence Grant came once, bringing a bottle of wine and a framed copy of the Westfield campaign results. "For the wall your father does not control," he said. I hung my Excellence in Strategy plaque above the fireplace. For the first time, my achievements were not hidden in drawers to avoid appearing arrogant. The essential repairs were completed by the end of November. The roof no longer leaked. The new electrical panel had been installed. The damaged windows were replaced. Most of the upstairs still needed cosmetic work, and the kitchen remained outdated. But the house was safe, warm, and ready to hold people. The family responded predictably. Cousin Elaine called to ask whether I was going through something. My mother's church friends began describing the house as an impulsive purchase caused by jealousy. Reverend Wallace preached about prideful children abandoning family unity. I heard about all of it. I answered none of it. Instead, I sent one brief message to the family group. For clarity, I never agreed to fund the anniversary celebration. Any claim that I withdrew, promised support is false. My father left the group immediately. My mother began sending private messages. At first, they followed the old pattern. You are hurting everyone. Your father cannot sleep. Miles's celebration has been reduced because of you. I did not reply. Then, the messages changed. I found several boxes from your grandmother's house. There may be photographs you would want. Another arrived 2 weeks later. I passed the bakery near your apartment. I remembered you used to like carrot cake. Is that still your favorite? I stared at that message for a long time. I did not answer. Remembering one cake did not erase 28 years. But it was the first question she had asked about me without attaching a request. Miles called several times. I ignored the first 4 calls. On the 5th, he left a voicemail. I am not calling about the party. I need to ask you about the transfer. I listened twice. Then he emailed. He apologized for asking for the Regent Tech introduction. He admitted that after the album dinner, he had begun reviewing the financial records connected to the condominium he and Jessica purchased nearly 3 years earlier. He asked for a copy of the portion of my bank statement showing the transfer to Dad. I sent a redacted copy, displaying only the date, amount, and receiving account. 2 days later, he wrote, Your transfer never entered the Hawthorne Development account. I still do not know where it went. I called him. His voice sounded exhausted. What exactly did you find? Dad moved the funds through Whitmore Holdings. The Hawthorne ledger does not show your money entering the development. That does not mean he used it for something else. No. It means he lied about where it went. A cold wind moved across the lake. Did you know? I asked. No. I believed he believed that. It did not absolve him of everything else. You never asked where the money came from. I know. Do not say that as though knowing now fixes it. It does not. His answer came without defense. I am going to find the records, he said. Do it because you need to understand your own life, Miles. Not because you think proof will make me forgive you. I am not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. He was quiet. No, he said. Not yet. In late November, I organized a small housewarming. I invited people who had shown up for me, without needing reminders. Jasmine filled the kitchen with music. Devin brought too much wine. Mrs. Bennett rearranged the reading chair and complained that I had blocked half the lake view. Lawrence arrived with Westfield's chief marketing officer, who toasted my leadership. As evening settled over the water, the rooms filled with laughter. No one compared me to Miles. No one redirected the conversation when someone praised my work. No one asked me to earn my place. At one point, I stood beside the window and saw my reflection layered over the guests behind me. For years, every reflection had seemed to contain my family's judgment. That night, it contained evidence of another life. Jasmine joined me. You are crying. I am not. You absolutely are. I laughed and wiped my cheek. What if this does not last? She looked around the room. Then you build it again. But people did not come because of the house, Clara. They came because of you. The following morning, the living room was scattered with empty glasses and folded blankets. My phone held dozens of notifications. Several were from relatives criticizing photographs Jasmine had posted. 3 were from my mother. The final message was from Miles. Your transfer never reached the project Dad said it would save. I found a title company reference in his files. I need to know what closing it belonged to. By early December, the anniversary celebration had become a source of public embarrassment for my parents. The Langford Ballroom reservation was canceled. The deposit was lost. The replacement event, still scheduled for January, had been moved to a smaller private dining room with fewer than 60 guests. My mother blamed me. My father blamed the hotel. No one blamed the 2 people who had signed an expensive contract based on money they did not control. An invitation arrived for a Sunday dinner marked family only, urgent. I considered refusing. Dr. Levine asked why I wanted to go. I want to know whether they have anything new to say. And if they do not, then I leave. This time, I carried nothing. No albums. No spreadsheet. No evidence. The truth had already been placed on the table once. The dining room looked exactly as it had during the previous confrontation. My father sat at the head. My mother wore a pale dress and no visible smile. Miles sat opposite me. He looked thinner. Jessica was absent again. When I asked, Miles said she had refused to participate in another meeting where my parents intended to pressure me. She supported canceling the ballroom, he said. She does not want an anniversary party paid for with money you never offered. It was the first time anyone had mentioned what Jessica wanted. Dinner began with strained politeness. My father discussed property values. Mother asked whether the lake house was warm enough in winter. Miles barely touched his food. Finally, Dad set down his fork. This situation has gone far enough. I waited. Your public statements have damaged the family's reputation. I stated the truth. You made private matters public. You put my name on a public program. Mother leaned forward. People believe we tried to steal from you. You tried to commit my money without permission. We expected you to behave as a daughter. What does that mean? To support your family, she said. I gave this family more than $30,000 nearly 3 years ago. My father's jaw tightened. We have explained that. No, Miles said. Everyone turned toward him. His voice remained quiet. You have not. Dad's eyes narrowed. This does not concern you. It involved family money. It concerns all of us. Not now, Miles. When? This is about Clara's behavior, Mother insisted. No. He placed his napkin on the table. It is about yours. The room became utterly still. Miles looked at me first. I should have asked more questions. About the party. About the money. About everything. My father scoffed. Do not perform guilt because your sister brought photograph albums. Miles turned to him. I reviewed the anniversary file. Clara never agreed to sponsor it. You knew that. We knew she would help eventually. You used her company title. We were honoring her success. You were using it to make the hotel believe she had committed. My mother began crying. We were trying to give you and Jessica something beautiful. I did not ask you to lie. You accepted the party, I said. Miles nodded. Yes, I did. He did not defend himself. I believed Clara was being difficult, because that was what you told me. I believed she had always resented me. I never stopped to ask whether she had a reason. Dad's face darkened. She is turning you against your own parents. Miles laughed once, without humor. No, she left. I looked at the records. He reached into the chair beside him and placed a folder on the table. I found Whitmore Holdings statements in the storage room. Clara's transfer never entered the Hawthorne development. That proves nothing, my father said. It proves you lied about its purpose, my mother whispered. Richard. Dad did not look at her. Miles continued. I also found a title, company reference, connected to a closing that occurred days after Clara's transfer. I requested the archived file. You had no right to go through private business documents. I had every right to investigate money connected to my family and possibly to me. Mother's face changed. It was small. A brief loss of control. Miles noticed. So you know what the closing was, he said. I do not know what you mean. You do. My father rose. You have embarrassed yourself enough. Miles stood too. No. I canceled the ballroom celebration. Jessica and I will pay for the smaller January dinner ourselves. You cannot cancel a family event without consulting us, Mother said. It is my anniversary. The irony silenced her. I have also told every relative who asked that Clara never promised the money, Miles continued. I told the Langford the same thing. My father pointed at him. You are throwing away your place in this family. Miles's expression changed. Is that what my place costs? My father stared. Obedience? Mother covered her mouth. Miles looked at me. I spent years accepting everything because it was offered. I told myself that meant I deserved it. I worked hard, but there was always a hand underneath me. I never asked whose hand it was. My eyes burned. I had wanted someone in that room to understand for so long that hearing it now felt almost unbearable. Dad pointed toward me. You see what you have done? I stood. No, I see what you did. You walk out of this house again. Do not come back. I looked at the man who once had the power to make those words terrifying. That is the point. I left the dining room. Cold air struck my face as I crossed the driveway. Clara. Miles followed me. He stopped several feet away, his breath visible in the winter air. The title company has the archived closing file, he said. Because I do not know which transaction the reference belongs to, they need additional information before releasing anything. What are you planning to do? Find out. Dad will fight you, I know. I gave him a look. He lowered his eyes. I am not asking one night of honesty to erase 28 years. The answer was better than another automatic apology. Why are you doing this? I asked. Because my whole life, I thought I had earned everything I received. He looked back at the mansion. I worked. I competed. I achieved things. But now I understand that effort was only part of the story. There was always money, attention, and protection underneath me. And you think the closing file will tell you where some of it came from? Yes. Finding the truth does not repair us. I understand. Returning money will not make us close. I understand that too. Then do not expect a reward. I do not. For a moment, we stood as two adults who had grown up in entirely different versions of the same house. I am not asking you to forgive me, he said. I am asking you not to stop me from learning what I should have questioned years ago. I opened my car door. Find the truth. He nodded. As I prepared to leave, Miles looked toward the house where he had always been the chosen son. The reference leads to a property closing, Clara, he said. And judging by Mom's face, I do not think either of us is going to like what I find. 1 year after the birthday, my family forgot. I woke to sunlight spreading across Lake Michigan. I was 29. The lake house no longer smelled of old paint and dust. The roof had been repaired. The damaged windows were replaced. The kitchen cabinets were deep blue. The bathroom had been renovated. The restored wooden floors reflected the morning light. My award hung above the fireplace. On the table sat a carrot cake with 30 candles, 29, for my age and 1 for luck. Jasmine had insisted. The previous day, Horizon announced my promotion to senior director. Lawrence Grant made the announcement in front of the entire firm. He did not call my success surprising. He did not compare me to anyone. He simply said I had earned it. The past year had not transformed everything. Healing was less dramatic than I once imagined. It looked like therapy appointments on difficult Thursdays. It looked like declining calls without offering explanations. It looked like learning that guilt could exist without requiring obedience. Miles sent occasional updates. The archived title company search had taken months because the reference was incomplete and the original file had been transferred to storage after the closing company merged with another firm. He did not demand that I respond. In January, he and Jessica held a modest anniversary dinner paid from their joint account. Fewer than 50 people attended. No program listed a sponsor. No relative was permitted to blame me during the speeches. A week later, Jessica sent me a short, handwritten note. I am sorry I accepted a celebration without asking who was expected to carry its cost. Miles and I are trying to understand what responsibility looks like when no one else can be blamed. I did not answer, but I kept the note. My mother wrote letters. The first apologized for the Langford contract. The second admitted she had always known I preferred carrot cake, but often chose Miles's favorite because everyone liked it. The third said she had begun counseling. None of the letters asked for money. My father sent nothing. That silence was more honest than a false apology. By noon, the lake house was full. Jasmine took control of the music. Devon opened champagne. Mrs. Bennett supervised the food as though the party had been organized under her authority. Colleagues filled the deck, laughing beneath strings of lights. For the first time, my birthday was not an examination of who had failed to appear. It was a celebration of who had chosen to come. Shortly after 2, tires crunched over the gravel drive. Miles stepped out of his car. He carried a flat-wrapped package and a thick document envelope. Jessica emerged from the passenger side. I had not expected her. She stood beside the car, allowing Miles to approach first. The conversations around me softened. Everyone knew who he was. I walked to the edge of the deck. You came. You said I could stop by. I did. He looked toward the guests. We will not stay long. You can stay if you are comfortable. His surprise was small but visible. Jessica approached. Happy birthday, Clara. Thank you. She held out a folded note. The repayment came from both of us, she said. Whatever the records show, I lived in the home too. I accepted the note but did not open it yet. Miles handed me the wrapped package. The paper was plain and carefully folded. Inside was a wooden frame. For several seconds, I could not breathe. I was 7 years old in the photograph. I sat on Grandma's tire swing, my hair flying behind me, my head tilted back in laughter. The colors had been restored, and the torn edge had been repaired. I looked completely free. Where did you find it? In one of Grandma's boxes, Miles said. Mom mentioned them in a letter. I went through everything. I thought it was gone. So did I. Why did Dad have it? He kept most of Grandma's photographs after the estate was cleared. I do not think he knew this one was there. My fingers touched the glass. Before my family taught me to disappear, I had known how to take up space. Thank you. Miles nodded toward the document envelope. That is not the only reason we came. We went inside to the quieter dining area. Jessica joined us. Miles placed the envelope on the table. I finally obtained the archived title, Company File. My chest tightened. He removed a closing statement, a gift letter, a copy of a cashier's check, and several pages from the Whitmore Holdings bank records. The title company released the closing statement, gift letter, and cashier's check record because Jessica and I were the buyers, he explained. The missing link came from the Whitmore Holdings statements I found in Dad's storage files. I followed the dates. The week you sent Dad $32,000, he transferred the full amount into a Whitmore Holdings operating account. Miles pointed to the next line. 2 days later, $30,000 was used to issue this cashier's check. The recipient was the title company, the same company that handled Miles and Jessica's condominium. My stomach tightened. The remaining $2,000 went toward their attorney and closing expenses, Miles said. I looked at the gift letter. It stated that Richard and Margaret Whitmore had provided the funds from their personal resources and did not expect repayment. My money had been transformed into their generosity. Dad told me Hawthorne Heights might collapse, I said. The project was already being refinanced, Miles replied. It was under pressure, but there was no immediate danger of losing the family house. He lied. Yes. He did not soften the word. He wanted to help Jessica and me purchase the condominium, but too much of his money was tied up. He knew you would not willingly give him $32,000 for us, so he told me the family might lose everything. Yes. I looked at Jessica. Did you know? No, she said. We were told it came from an investment account your parents had maintained for Miles. Miles continued. I believed it because I had never been given a reason to question where help came from. That is not completely true, I said. You had reasons. You chose not to look. His face tightened. You are right. He pulled a bank check from the envelope. The amount was $38,000. $32,000 plus approximately 4 years of interest at a conservative rate, he said. I pushed it back. I did not ask you for this. No, Jessica said. You should never have had to. You did not steal the money. We benefited from it, Miles replied. You did not know. We also did not ask. The words echoed what he had admitted in the driveway. He continued. I spent years accepting everything because it was offered. I told myself that meant I deserved it. I cannot change what happened, but I can stop keeping the benefit. The condominium was partly purchased with money you never intended to give us, Jessica added. We refinanced earlier this year. This repayment came from an account we funded together. I looked at the check. This does not purchase forgiveness. We know, Jessica said. It does not make Miles and me close. I know, he began, then stopped himself. He lowered his eyes. I am not asking one responsible act to erase everything I ignored. The correction mattered. Then what do you want? I asked. Nothing today, he said. I wanted you to have the truth, the photograph, and the money. What happens afterward is yours to decide. I picked up the check. It felt different from the keys to the lake house. The keys represented a future I had chosen. The check represented a past someone was finally willing to acknowledge. You can stay for cake, I said. Miles looked up. Are you sure? I am not promising anything beyond cake. A small smile crossed his face. That is more than I expected. The party resumed around them cautiously. Miles did not dominate conversations. He helped Jasmine carry glasses. Jessica spoke quietly with Devin about the drive from Chicago. Mrs. Bennet explained to both of them why my reading chair was still positioned incorrectly. Near sunset, another car entered the driveway. My mother stepped out alone. She wore a simple navy coat. No pearls. No dramatic makeup. She held a small bakery box. I met her at the foot of the deck. "Mom. Happy birthday, Clara." Her voice trembled, but she did not cry. She opened the box. Inside was one carrot cupcake with cream cheese frosting. The sight of it hurt more than I expected. Not because it repaired the past, because it proved remembering had always been possible. "I know this is small," she said. "It is." She nodded. "I know." For once, she did not ask me to make her feel better. "I cannot return the birthdays," she continued. "I cannot change what we gave Miles or what we withheld from you. I cannot make the album full. No. I spent years telling myself you did not need me. Your independence made it easier for me not to examine what we were doing. I thought about Dad saying I had been easier to ignore. At least you are saying it now. There is something else." She looked toward Miles through the window. "I knew the money came from you." The words landed without surprise. "Only wait." "How much did you know?" "Richard told me he would replace it once the Hawthorne refinancing was complete. He said helping Miles with the condominium was temporary, and that you would eventually understand." "And you believed him?" "I chose not to ask whether you had agreed." Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. "That was not ignorance, Clara. It was cowardice." For several moments, neither of us spoke. "Did you know what Dad told me?" "No. I did not know he said the house might be lost, but I knew you believed the money was for something else. That should have been enough." "Yes." She did not defend herself. "I have begun counseling," she said. "Not because I expect it to bring you back. Because I finally understand I cannot call myself a loving mother while refusing to face what I did." "Are you still with Dad?" "Yes." "Does he believe he did anything wrong?" "No." Her honesty mattered. "He says Miles betrayed him. He says you poisoned the family. And what do you say?" "I say we created the conditions that allowed both of you to leave us." For several moments, I listened to the lake. "I can let you stay for cake," I said. Relief appeared on her face, but I raised a hand. "That is not forgiveness." "I understand. You do not ask me for money." "I will not." "You do not use my name to make commitments." "I will not." "You do not tell anyone this. Means everything is repaired." "I will not." "And if you defend Dad's behavior, the visit ends." She nodded. "I understand." I stepped aside. My mother entered the house quietly. She sat near the edge of the gathering, watching people celebrate me. When someone praised my promotion, she did not redirect the conversation toward Miles. When Jasmine lit the candles, Mother did not stand beside the cake as though she had organized the day. She simply watched. I made a wish before blowing out the candles. Not for my father to apologize. Not for the empty album to fill itself. Not for my childhood to become something it had never been. I wished for the strength to keep choosing the life in front of me. Later, I placed the tire swing photograph on the mantel. Miles stood beside me. "She looks happy," he said. She was. She still exists. I looked around the room. At Jasmine laughing in the kitchen. At Mrs. Bennet, folding napkins no one had asked her to fold. At Jessica, speaking softly with Devin. At my mother holding an empty plate and listening. At Miles standing near me without asking to be centered. "Yes," I said. "She does." For the first time, opening my door to them did not mean giving myself away. After the final guest left, I stepped onto the deck barefoot. The lake stretched beneath a sky, painted violet and rose. Behind me, the windows glowed with warm light. Empty glasses stood on the dining table, the remains of a birthday cake waited in the kitchen, and a restored photograph rested above the fireplace. The house was quiet, but it was not empty. For most of my life, I believed forgiveness would arrive as one grand moment. I imagined my parents finally understanding everything, apologizing perfectly, and somehow restoring every birthday, graduation, and family trip I had lost. That was not what happened. My father still believed he had been wronged. My mother had only begun facing what she had done. Miles and I were not suddenly close. The past remained exactly where it had always been. But it no longer owned the future. I had learned that forgiveness did not mean erasing the empty pages. It meant I could remember them without using them as evidence that I was unworthy. Boundaries had not destroyed my family. They had exposed the damage that silence had allowed everyone to ignore. I lifted a glass toward the water. To the people who showed up, I whispered. Jasmine, Devon, Mrs. Bennett, Lawrence. The friends who helped turn damaged walls into a home. To my sanctuary. The house stood behind me, built not only from wood, money, and work, but from every decision to stop abandoning myself. Finally, I raised the glass toward my reflection in the darkening window. And to me, not Clara, the forgotten daughter. Not Clara, the convenient bank account. Not Clara standing outside someone else's spotlight. Just Clara Whitmore. A woman who walked out of a house that never truly saw her and built one where she decided who was allowed through the door. For the first time in my life, I did not wait for someone else to celebrate me. And I finally understood that I had always been worth celebrating.